Joining me today on the Capital TV show, David Lashar. He's Libertarian candidate for Maryland governor. How are you today, David?
Maria, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on your show.
Why do you think the Marylanders gonna vote for you?
Well, I think that Marylanders, like all Americans, are pretty fed up with what they've been seeing and getting from the Democratic and Republican parties that everybody recognizes have been in control of American politics for 160 years, right?
Mhm.
So I think that there is an appetite for something new, and what polls show is that depending on which part of the population you're talking about, Americans want to hear from third parties at 50 to 65%. Right?
Mhm.
So, so I'm bringing forth a different message, a message that has some overlap with traditional classical liberal policies from the Democrats and Republicans, and the fiscal responsibility of the Republican Party, but not as much, more respect for individual choice than we see in Donald Trump's modern Republican Party.
Do you think now we are in need of a third party? Did you hear about Forward Party? And it's established by conservative and Democrats who they consider themselves independent. Can you talk more on this?
Yeah, I think more so than ever, we need a third party. When there was generally a consensus on social values and political objectives through pretty much the entire 20th century here in the States, I think two parties did an okay job, a good enough job. But at present, I think that the two parties have become polarized and are no longer representing regular Americans, working people,
Mhm.
uh, and I would say that in the American political spectrum that ranges from a JFK liberal, right, John F. Kennedy, to a Ronald Reagan Republican, there's no valid options on the ballot anymore or in politics anymore. And the two parties aren't trying to work together anymore. They're not trying to find common ground. They're trying to dig in and protect themselves and the power that they have. So yeah, I think we need a third party, whether it's the Libertarian Party. I think we need more than three parties, by the way, Maria. Right?
Yeah, yeah.
I, I'd love to have a handful. Right? And if my own party's ideas can't prevail in the political marketplace, a proper political marketplace, then shame on us.
Mhm.
Right? But Green Party, Libertarian Party, and you mentioned the Forward Party. So that's an interesting development.
Lots of domestic problems that has to be solved. But let's talk about the Treasury Department announcement. They said that the American debt reached $31 billion. Is it a dangerous number, in your opinion?
Yeah, well, it's trillions of dollars, right? $30 trillion, and it's not just that it's at $30 trillion as a number; it's
Mm.
the rate at which it's increasing. So just a handful of years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, it was the number was more like 22, let's say.
Hmm.
We've expanded in a handful of years by one third. This is not sustainable, and I do unfortunately worry about a financial reckoning in this country,
Yeah.
and so we can't we can't keep expanding spending without getting taxes commensurate.
Mm.
Uh, here, I can't fix the federal level problems, which is where most of the problem is, because the federal government gets to print its own money
Hmm.
and is also able to borrow as long as lenders are willing to step forward with money. But at the state level that I'm running for office, we have a de facto balanced budget.
Yeah, yeah. If we kind of compare the situation or the depth of US to the expenses we are using in foreign affairs, especially, you know that the Biden administration are committed to help Ukrainian people. How this war is expensive, how expensive is this war getting, and we read a report that Russia is using stolen Ukraine grain to fund the war. Your approach?
I see first and foremost a tragedy. That's I work with people who are in Ukraine, from Ukraine. They have obviously been subjected to a true existential threat, invasion. We here in American politics are throwing around existential threats uh, too much, but that the Ukrainians found a true existential threat. And how did it come about? I would say that it came about from irresponsible and unpredictable foreign policy from both Republicans and Democrats
Mhm.
over decades now. Right? From
Yeah,
at least, whether it's Bush, whether it's Trump, whether it's Obama, whether it's Biden, I think that there was just doubt about what America would do and contempt for whatever it is that America might do if it did anything. But in general, I'd like to see the U.S. Uh, doing far less involved in the affairs of other countries, uh, far fewer expeditions overseas. Uh, that is not what this country should be doing. So maybe we learned some lessons from this tragedy, Maria.
yeah. Let's talk about the gas prices. As gas prices rise, Democrats scramble to lay blame on big oil companies. At the midterm now election approaches, tensions rise between the White House and these oil companies. How do you see the situation?
I think we need to quit looking for scapegoats. I think we need to quit demonizing either oil companies or other parties. Look, where we are right now with inflation in the US, gas and otherwise, I mean, it's not just gas, right? It's groceries, right?
Everything,
It's
yeah.
everything. It's everything. And both parties are to blame,
Mhm.
right? Because they have been complicit in building up this $31 trillion of debt that you were alluding to, Maria, right?
Yeah.
That's the fundamental problem is that we have overprimed the Keynesian engine, right? The government's spending too much. Uh, and then we did the lockdowns.
Mm-hmm.
Both, and when I say we, I mean the two parties that are in control of American politics coast to coast, right? At federal and state level. We went into the lockdowns and we disrupted not only supply chains for goods, but the labor markets. And the labor markets still are not recovering, right? People are still not getting back to work. And frankly, people are human beings, and human beings they're not going to work if they don't have to, right? In general, that's very natural. I don't blame people. What we need to do is remove uh, the over incentives that we've had for people to stay at home, not have to pay their rent, be
Mm-hmm.
excused from paying their rent, right? Receive payments for cover. No, we got to get back to normal. And you are not actually an adult fulfilling your responsibilities if you're not paying for the things that you need, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, now, of course, people in Baltimore, in Maryland, for example, I mean, there's a lack of opportunity. I'm not denying that. I'm not saying that there's all the work available that people might need, but you talk to anybody in a small business, a medium-sized business, or a large business in the United States today, including me with an IT shop,
Yeah.
and say, we can't find enough people.
This is getting worse, I think. I'm searching for some polls. There is a Gallup study said that 62% of voters believe the two main parties are not doing their part as required to the point that an alternative party is needed. So this is considering what you're talking about. And there is another poll by Trafalgar Groups. They said they revealed that 56.8% of Americans believe President Biden's September 1st speech in Philadelphia was a dangerous escalation of political discourse and was intended to incite conflict in the United States. Do you think that the conflict gonna grow before 4th of November?
Unfortunately, the Philadelphia speech did reveal that the Democratic Party here in the United States is no different than the Republican Party in that it'll say anything, do anything to retain and expand its power, right? So even though what I hear from people who defend that speech is that he said that President Biden said things that needed to be said about MAGA Republicans. Okay, Well, things needed to be said, but they didn't need to be said that way. We don't need more authoritarians. What we really need from our political leaders in the United States, and what kind of political leader I'm trying to stand forth to be here in Maryland, as an example to others,
Yes, of course.
are political leaders who don't relish the culture wars that we're engaged in right now, don't want to inflame the tensions and the passions, but want to tap them down, want to be conciliators, find common ground. I certainly have not given up that there is common ground because I'm going out and talking to people,
Mm-hmm.
and they're appalled at what we're getting.
Yeah, yeah, and there is something very important. Association of Mature American Citizens, AMAC, in their polls, they say that 6.7% said that they blamed the Russian invasion of Ukraine for inflation. And that we saw President Biden saying always Putin is responsible of the price hike. How do you see this?
For the inflation, I see multiple causes, right? It's never, I think there's always an impulse to say it's just one thing. That's political theater, right? That's somebody engaging in some politician engaging in the political games of deflecting blame elsewhere, saying it wasn't me.
Yeah.
Well, right. So did the invasion of Ukraine by Putin have some impact on oil prices, gas prices here in the United States? Yes, but so did some. But I submit that even more. I'm no economist, but it feels to. But another contributing cause
Yeah.
was day one after inauguration. Joe Biden went from giving his speech at the Capitol, drove up 16 blocks Pennsylvania Avenue, and started writing executive orders for policies that he did not campaign upon, like ending the Keystone pipeline, right? Stopping drilling in property that the federal government owns in parks of the Arctic, right?
Mm.
So
I had an interview with a former Commerce Secretary, Carlos Gutierrez. He said that we have oil, we can produce rather than begging Venezuela to give us oil. So why they don't make the relationship with gas companies better and collaborate together to solve this crisis?
yeah, I agree. Part of it is, so I want to bring in climate politics as well, right? Because that was the incentive, I think, the political incentive for Joe Biden to execute those orders. But you know, when Joe Biden did that with majorities in both chambers of the U.S. Congress, what he was telling the oil producing companies, whether small, bigger, medium, or large, is don't invest your capital in this business because we're trying to bring this market to a close, right? That's another thing that happened. The signal you send to for investment. And on the climate, I'm no climate denier. Human-induced climate change is part of what we're witnessing, and
But the climate change is a global
I
thing,
agree.
not only American.
Well, but right, and the key is not to overreact. The key is not to panic, right? We can see that Europe is in for a very cold and difficult winter because they did overreact. They did not keep enough of a diversified energy portfolio. They made themselves vulnerable. So what we have to do is not underreact, but not overreact either.
Mm.
And so with the energy, I think it is important to recognize that fossil fuels can be used in very responsible, low emission ways, right? At least for the next 10 or 20 years, when we're still going to be in a transition period to
So the energy strategy has to be reconsidered, has to be fixed in this country. Let me, because the time is a little bit tight, let me ask you about Khamenei, Iran leader, supreme leader. He said about the uprising, you know, the protesters, he accused the US and Israel of fomenting unrest and voiced support for the crackdown on protesters. And Meanwhile, this administration is willing to negotiate with this regime, brutal regime. How do you see this?
I think that in general, the U.S. has been too meddlesome in politics around the world, and in a very general way, what I would like to see is more of what prevailed famously in Europe in the 19th century and worked, which is balances of power, right? Respect nations, don't try to turn them into something that they don't want to be, but generally, and don't try to be the international policeman, police force, but try to bring about a world in which regions are managing themselves. But I do want to be clear, Maria, that that includes an Israel that is an Israel, right? I mean, this as part of the Middle Eastern region. Do I have the answer? I don't. I just have the principle and the desire for the United States to be less intrusive there and elsewhere. Smith.
David, thank you so much. Wish you all the luck. Good to see you here.
Enjoyed it very much, Maria. You gave me some things to think about that I hadn't been thinking about. Appreciate that.
Hey, Maria Malouf here. Please click to like and subscribe to Maria Malouf TV YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.